Okay, so it is recognised that in some circumstances, a pool operator, teacher or coach will have to assess the risk, and it may feel more appropriate to teach from within the water. Now, an example of this that came on one of the previous calls that we did was the pool was actually out of the ground. So if the teacher stood on the pool side, their view was limited of the swimmers then at that point. So their risk assessment was actually they needed to be in the water because they could maintain an overview of the swimmers a lot easier than from outside the pool, because it wasn't at deck level, it was raised out of the ground. So that was the risk assessment to get in. And again, we've had people that have got really awkward kind of leisure pools or difficult teaching stations that mean that you can't get around them. So they felt it was more appropriate to teach from in the water. So that's absolutely fine. You can get in, but you need to risk assess it, and you still need to maintain social distancing. Also, if you are getting into the water, but you are also the role of the qualified lifeguard as well, if you get into the water, you need to make sure that somebody else has an overview of that class. So either a lifeguard on poolside, or you have another teacher with the overview of your class as well. Because when you get into the water, you still need someone to maintain that overview. So again, consider that in your risk assessments. And we're going to cover that in a sec. So some of the questions that we've had so far, as we've gone through these presentations, we thought we would bring them up now, because hopefully it will alleviate some of them in the chat box as they come through. So what you can do, you can teach from within the water, but with a suitable risk assessment. You can invite parents into the water to support the lessons, and Lauren's going to cover that a bit further later. You can encourage parents and learners to put their own equipment on, such as back floats and arm discs, prior to the lesson starting. Teaching non-swimmers in a varied depths, including deep water. So it's okay to teach non-swimmers and weaker swimmers in deeper water, as long as you take into consideration some of the things that we're going to discuss later. You can use a variety of different equipment also to meet your learners' needs, and this equipment can be cleaned by using the pool water to do so. Again, it's about mitigating risk, not eliminating it. But what you can't do, you can't manually support swimmers outside of your household or bubble. You can't manually support preschool swimmers in the water either, or those with special educational needs or disabilities. You can't have physical contact with swimmers to put equipment on, such as back floats or arm discs, unless in an emergency situation. So if a child is coming loose in their shark fin or their back float, or they're slipping off of their noodle and you need to sort them out, that is absolutely fine. But we want to try and encourage these learners to start to learn to do some of this stuff themselves, rather than dragging them to and fro either side of the water. It's a much better learning environment for them anyway.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So we're going to start off with the key considerations for adapting your lessons to deep water. You may already teach in deep water, but we want to talk about some considerations for you to work with and implement if you're not already doing so. So the ones that we've come up with for today's session are safety, communication, your delivery adaptations, and how you'll change your practices, your activities, and your organization. Equipment, some further training you may or may not need to help support you. And then finally, our top tips that you can hopefully take away and implement some of the strategies we've discussed today. So let's start with some of the safety adaptations you need to consider. So clearly communicate your changes to your swimmers and parents. So what do they need to know ahead of that lesson and as they arrive, to make sure that journey is as smooth as possible for them? So think about that pre-communication. It'll be really important to make sure they're comfortable. Ensure that all staff are aware of any changes that you're making. So not only do the swimming teachers need to be equipped with how to adapt to deep water, but so do the lifeguards and the front of house staff and anybody that's going to have that contact with your swimmers, to ensure that they know why you're in deep water teaching and any of the kind of responsibilities they may have. Risk assess, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but change your risk assessments and then review your pool safety operating procedures to make sure they're still in line with the changes you've made. So that's something you can be doing pre-getting into the pool, and it can be ready for when you start delivering. What equipment do you need to consider? And we've got lots of fantastic videos and examples to show you in a moment, but think about what equipment you can now use to support your lessons in deep water. Where will you teach from? will you need to teach from a different position? Do you need to think about how you're communicating in your demos? So think about your effective teaching positions. How will you adapt your practices? So we're going to talk in a minute about core aquatic skills and how that still needs to be covered and is still crucial for non-swimmers, even if you're in deep water. So have a think about how you could adapt those skills. And then what will the impact be for these swimmers that have been out of the water for a significant amount of time? So I think it was last week we reached 100 days since lockdown started. So that's at least 100 days where the vast majority of your members will have not been swimming at all, let alone in a swimming lesson or a swimming pool environment. So what effect will that have, and how will you need to adapt your first lessons, especially if they're in deep water, to support those learners? And then finally, and Lauren's going to talk about this some more, what effect could have having parents in the water? So what benefits and challenges will that pose to help you with your delivery? Okay, so just kind of a little bit on a risk assessment. So it's important that before you do this, especially if it's a change, especially if it's something you've not already been doing, that you conduct a risk assessment of the activity of teaching in deep water. So think about those hazards and what the likelihood of those hazards are to cause harm, and what you can do to reduce or eliminate those hazards. Now, this is going to be different in this COVID environment because you've now got new risks to consider and new hazards. But what can we do, as Katie said, not necessarily to eliminate everything because we are in a pool, COVID is potentially present in our environment, but what can we do to mitigate and eliminate them? So a couple of things you need to consider generically are things like your type of pool. So consider the depth, the shape. Have you got any blind spots? How do you intend to get the learners in and out of the pool and in and out of the facility? What are the abilities of the swimmers? And we're going to talk about adaptations in a minute and how you can work with that. But what are their current abilities and what maybe abilities pre-lockdown? What activities, practices, and equipment do you intend on using? And what staff are there to support those lessons? So when you're doing your risk assessment, consider all of those kind of factors so that you're ready and prepared to reduce that risk when you go back to the pool. Now, to help you with that, we've got a free template on our website that's branded that you can use, pull off for free, and conduct your own risk assessment. But there are lots more stuff out there that you can use as well. So for example, we've got a checklist for operational staff on our website as well, which will help you ensure your staff are ready when they're returning to the pool. So you're welcome to use those. But there's also companies such as Right Directions that have something called Stitch, which is a platform that you can tap into that will allow you to monitor, conduct, and manage your risk assessment processes in an online forum. So there's lots of kind of different tools out there for you to use. You may have one already. You may be part of a large organization and have one already, but they're there to support you if you've not. But just consider your risk assessment and what needs to be reviewed ahead of getting into the pool. Okay, before we go into delivery adaptations, Lauren and Katie, have you had any questions?
Yeah, we've just had a couple that have come in around teachers rotating workstations by taking their equipment with them. Not a problem at all. Again, everything that you're going to see today is guidance and recommendations, and you can apply it to your pool setting as you see fit and write your risk assessments accordingly. If you want your teachers to rotate because you've got a big enough pool space, you've got enough equipment for it to successfully be cleaned between lessons without taking up too much time, then absolutely. But we're obviously just giving some recommendations and some suggestions of people that we've worked with in the past that actually where the pool depth isn't very big, manoeuvring that amount of equipment around could take a lot of time. But it's completely up to you guys how you take and apply this guidance and this information. It's exactly the same as kind of the safe supervision document as well. Guidance and advice, and you apply it and write your risk assessments accordingly. I think what Alex said about risk assessments is really important. Now, a lot of you will be writing, if you're swim school owners and managers or ops managers, you'll be writing risk assessments for the activities taking place, like your aqua aerobics, your learn to swim lessons. But as teachers, we also need to risk assess our activities that we are doing in the pool as well. So there's two types of kind of risk assessment, and those of you that have done your level 2 recently, you will know that there's a risk assessment at the bottom of your lesson plan, which now you might need to pull back out and have a look at to adapt accordingly to that environment. Lauren, I know you've been tapping away.
Yeah, there was just a question where somebody's already concerned that parents will be out of their depth in a 3-meter pool. We know that when we're delivering this content that we are talking to a whole variety of pools. So hopefully there's going to be something in there that we will touch on as we go through. We are not suggesting that we are expecting parents to be treading water in the deep end to support their child. So just bear that in mind, but we're going to touch on that a little bit more. But please remember that we've had to take the broad approach with this delivery so that we can cater to all pool types. I don't think there's anything else at the moment, Katie. I think that was probably it. I've managed to type away.
No worries. I just pick up on the one around, there's a comment around David Lloyd as part of community swimming pool. Remember, when you go back, if you're working for one of providers, they may have changed the pool out and the pool programming accordingly. So the pool spaces that you previously used to teach in may now have changed. So hopefully there's when we get the go ahead, fingers crossed soon, to start reopening some of those conversations, and we've had this in the chat bar already where they've started to induct the teachers into kind of how the pool outs are going to look, the timetabling might change. So I think if you're used to teaching in a certain space, that could potentially change now given obviously this new environment. So have a conversation with them before you go back. It could be very different. And there was just another one around a carer for special educational needs. Yep, absolutely, they can get in, and we'll cover that later.
Okay, brilliant, guys. Well, please keep the questions coming. We will come back to them. As you've seen there, what we'll do is we'll let them build up, and then we'll stop at the end of a section and answer them. So please keep them coming, and we will make sure we get to them as we go through the presentation this morning. Okay, so some of those questions lead us on really nicely to our kind of first kind of pause here in this section, is what exactly is deep water teaching? And as Katie said at the start, it's where the learners are out of their depth. So initially, when I think of deep water teaching, when I first started teaching, I thought straight to that teaching in a diving pool 5 meters deep or something like that. And yes, that would be deep water teaching, but actually it's just out of their depth as well. So it might be in the middle of your pool. It might be 1.2 meters if you're working with preschool. So in terms of that example of parents, yes, sometimes they will be there to support if the parents can stand up, and sometimes not. It just depends on your environment. But when we're talking about deep water, it's just any depth that is significant, that is deeper than the child or the swimmer in the lesson. So that'll probably be a lot of your lessons. And with that in mind, some of the things we're going to talk about now are good practices in general, rather than necessarily just because it's COVID. And what we hope is we've tried to build those throughout the webinar so that there's elements of delivery and adaptations that you can use now and beyond when COVID hopefully is all gone and you're just in a new environment teaching. So a couple of kind of first thoughts in terms of our adaptations you can make to ensure your deep water lessons are effective. So manage the expectations of parents and swimmers. So your lessons will look different. You might be using different equipment, working on slightly different outcomes or making adjustments to those outcomes. So manage their expectations, let them know why you're doing it, and that'll alleviate some of that feedback you may get from parents. So just think about that communication pre and post lesson to help support your delivery. Can you change your delivery area? So if you're now teaching in deep water, and Katie gave an example of somebody in David Lloyd or any centre for that matter, where the pool might look different, think about, well, would a smaller area work better for my learners? So we're working on shorter distances more frequently, rather than a longer distance out of their depth, where they're going to start getting fatigue and their strokes are going to start dropping in ability. So think about that and adjust in your pool space to match the delivery of your lesson. Can you use parents in water? And as we've said, this is not necessarily going to work for every lesson because of the depth of the pool, but what advantages can they bring in terms of communication, supporting class sizes and numbers, and then what changes might you need to make? Now, it won't necessarily affect your teaching ratio. If anything, you could potentially have more children in the class, but it will affect the amount of pool space you potentially need. So think about that pool space and think about how you would use those parents to your advantage. But certainly for the lower stages in preschool, it could be a real advantage to your class to consider utilizing those parents. And then finally, what about class sizes? So are your class sizes going to change when you get back to the pool? Now, our ratios from the National Boundary haven't significantly changed pre or post COVID because of the work we've done in understanding the scientific evidence and then putting theories forward as to how you can swim your learners. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But your pool, as Lauren rightly said, is going to be vastly different to other people's pools on the call. So think about how you can adapt your class sizes to suit your new needs, whether that be larger with a bigger pool space or smaller. Okay, so we're going to look at pool layouts now, and then once we've gone through this section, we'll stop because I can see the chat box, there's lots and lots of questions, so thank you for those. So you'll have seen in our guidance that we have done some examples of pool layouts, and there's one on screen currently. Now, again, as we just said, this is not necessarily going to be representative of your pool, but what we've done is we've used guiding principles to create this pool that you can then relate to your setting. So things in terms of delivery, organization, where the teacher would deliver from, so that you can relate that to your pool setting. So a couple of things to note on this screen, and we have got a dedicated resource that Lauren will tell you more about at the end of this webinar for understanding our pool layouts. But a couple of things to note. So you can see on the screen there's green and red boxes. Now they're to indicate where the learners may get in the water and may get out. So there's a clear break between people entering the water and people exiting the water. We've also got considerations on there, and I saw someone put it in the chat box about there's blue arrows going all the way around the outside of the swimming pool, and that's to indicate that people will travel clockwise in our scenario or anti-clockwise. So people aren't crashing, or there isn't a flow of traffic, as it were. We've also got indications of examples of organizational methods, and we'll take you through those in a minute. But we've got waves, cannons, and circuits all represented on the screen to show how you can keep swimmers socially distancing while they're swimming within the pool. We've also got considerations such as their teaching points, where you deliver your lesson from, and the equipment you might use in your lesson and where you might keep that. So things such as not sharing your register in one individual teacher, you're not therefore breaking socially distancing between staff. So again, we've got a dedicated resource that's free to download and view on our website that will take you through that a little bit more. But what we're going to do now, we're going to relate this to deep water teaching and dive into that kind of topic a little bit further. So this pool layout that we've done on screen now is just an example of how you can deliver deep water in a variety of different methods. So every one of those pool stations you can see on screen now is suitable for non-swimmers in deep water. What you might have to do is just change your delivery, your organizational methods, and the equipment you're using. So as you're considering your pool layout, please don't be put off by maybe the deep water or because it's not what you've always done. Consider whether actually if I need to change this to better suit my learners' needs and the class sizes I've now got. So just a few examples there for you on screen that you can see now. Okay, let's have a look at some of the kind of organizational methods and how you might get the best out of a deep water space in comparison to how you're teaching before. So we've got a bit of an example now on screen, how you can think about differentiation and how you can challenge learners to do different distances or skills within the same class. Could you consider having some learners go a shorter distance? So you can see this represented by the 2 cones on screen. So you've got half your class going to one cone, that might be 2 or 3 meters out, and then returning. So they're doing a maximum of 4 to 5 meters. Whereas the other learners are going to the second cone and traveling a much further distance and then returning. So how can you adapt your pool space and use other equipment so that learners in your class aren't all doing the same thing? So you're doing an activity with purpose that's really getting the best out of individual learners. You can then start considering, well, what equipment do they need? Do some of these need less armbands, or do they need a reduced noodle or something else? So just think about how you can differentiate your lesson with your equipment and your distances to ensure you're getting the most out of your learners. Okay, so there's a little bit of an example on screen now of some circuits. So you can see here how we've got learners traveling around the side of the pool. So again, instead of swimming potentially A to B, think about how you can get learners to travel around the pool, again, to get used to that space. So could you set up different activities in different corners? Could they have a starting point and an end point so they don't gather at one side of the pool and break social distancing rules? And can you use the deep water effectively so that there's more touch points for the learners around the pools, rather than teaching, say, in the middle of the pool where they might only have two ends? So think about how deep water teaching can be advantageous to non-swimmers because of the touch points and the angles you can swim them in. Okay, so we've got a bit of an example now of how you could set learners off in waves on screen. So how you can get your learners to split on either side of the pool and then travel across each other. Because what we know is the risk of transmission is significantly reduced while they're in transition compared to being static. So if you can get your learners at either side of the pool and set your class up in that way, and then they swim across each other, and again, you need to consider the equipment and spacing, but actually then you might be able to deliver more activities more frequently so they can continue to practice their skill. So there's an example of this on screen at the minute.
Alex, can I just jump in there, because we've just had some really good questions that have come through in relation to some of these. So Graham's going to decide that when they go back to basics on water safety for the first few lessons, exactly that. Make sure the children know how to regain an upright position, especially if they're not used to having so much flotation equipment on. If they previously have had you to manually support them, check they can do rotation from their front to their back so they can perform a star float, they can shout for help, or they know what to do if their goggles come off. We've got some real great parent resources around teaching them to put their goggles on and off. And again, it's really good practice to teach them how to swim without them on as well, so they don't panic in the event that it should come off. The example that you can see on the screen as well is that we need to think about differentiation and grouping of ability of participants. Not every participant needs the same amount of equipment. So when we go up and down the country and we watch swimming lessons, we can see a variety of swimming lessons where every single child has exactly the same piece of equipment. Just because it's a progressive activity doesn't mean that it's applicable for that child at that point in time. So we see a lesson where everybody gets a noodle and two floats and they go across the pool. The two floats get put down and then everyone picks up the noodle and then comes back the other side. The noodle goes down, they pick up one float and they go back to the other side. And every single child starts in the same way. But actually, you've probably got half the class that can't move on because they haven't got a good leg kick or a good body position with a noodle and two floats. And you've probably got some children that could start on one float because actually their leg kick and body position is a lot stronger and a lot better than the others. So the example that you can see on the screen shows that differentiation, that not every child needs exactly the same amount of equipment. So when you're thinking about that going back to basics and water safety, actually analyse and assess the student's ability, and then you can make the decision on what equipment is applicable to them at that point in time as well. So thank you for that, Graham, that was good. We just had a question on the size of the pools that we've got. It could be anything. Remember that you're still working to 6 meters squared worth of space per student. That hasn't changed in our guidance. Even though the government social distancing has gone down to 1 metre, we are still working to 6 metres squared, so it can be applied to any space. Lauren, was there anything else that you wanted to pick up?
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions about children not being able to swim in a straight line. I mean, yeah, I was just going to say, of course, within reason, we know that children are not going to be able to stick to an exact path. But with the equipment on the screen and how we're just giving you ideas to add to your toolbox and to use, and with the social distancing guidelines, we're hoping that children will be able to stay within a reasonable distance. So yeah, we'll cover a little bit more on that.
Yeah, and as Lauren rightly said, again, and Katie talked about in the risk assessments, is we're mitigating risk. We're not going to eliminate it. There may be times they get closer than 2 meters or 1 meter plus, but we know we've mitigated it because we're in a chlorine environment, with they're not coming in if they've got symptoms, they're becoming beach ready. We're reducing it because they're in transition and not static. So all the time we're reducing and reducing and reducing and reducing the risk. So it's a controlled activity. And that's one of the reasons we're campaigning so passionately for swimming pools to get a date to reopen, because we think it can be managed effectively.
Yeah, and Annie's just said that she's obviously got a very lovely pool. She's got lines at the bottom, so she does get the children, you know, within reason. There are ways around it, and getting children to understand where they need to be swimming, where they need to be waiting to go next. We understand that all of these diagrams and these examples that we give you, they do look perfect, and we understand that swimming lessons aren't going to be perfect, but it's having that toolbox of options.
Again, guys, please keep the kind of the chat coming through, because these are most useful, these webinars, when we have your feedback as well. So thank you for that. Just got another example on screen of setting them off staggered now. You can see that how they're slowly going across one phased across the pool. So think about how you can utilize your different organizational methods, such as your waves, cannons, circuits, to get the most out of your space and keep them moving as possible. And as we said, we know the risk of transmission is reduced when they're in transition rather than static. So keep those learners moving and active throughout their lesson as much as possible. Okay, so just before I hand over to Lauren to take us through some adaptations for assistants and parents, just think about how you can adapt your core aquatic skills into deep water teaching. So just because they're necessarily out of their depth or they're in flotation equipment, doesn't mean that you can't still focus on those key skills that are the foundation for a strong swimmer. So think about how you can still include buoyancy and balance, and therefore different types of floats and sculling. Think about how you can include water safety early on. And again, someone mentioned then about we're going to do water safety in the beginnings of our lessons when we come back. And we've got some temporary lesson plan structures on our website, again for free, that you can download and use as the basis for your lesson plans for the first 2 or 3 weeks as you return to the pool to do exactly that. Think about spending time on entries and exits. So again, that's a key skill, getting in and out of the pool safely. And this could be quite daunting in the new environment if the entry points and exit points are different. So think about covering that as part of your lesson as well. But just have a think before you get back to the pool, how you can incorporate core aquatic skills in deep water and still make that effective. Lauren, we will swap. I'll go into the chat box. I'll hand over to you for the next section.
Thanks, Alex. So we did have a couple of comments around teaching assistants, and of course we want to ensure that we are working with all pools across England. So I do understand that some people won't have teaching assistants, but those that do, here are some great ways that we can still use our teaching assistants, whether they're in the water or on the pool side. Now, if they are in the water, can we just make it clear that they still need to adhere to social distancing rules? They are set by the government. So if you feel that it's necessary to have them in the water, they can be in there, but just at the distance set. So other ways you can use teaching assistants from the pool side as well, using them for demonstrations and the use of the visual resources. There is a link that we will drop in the chat in a minute, where we've actually uploaded some of the visual resources that we have available to download and laminate. They can oversee transition from pool section to changing room. So Katie mentioned it as well. If you've had to redesign or reconfigure your pool, maybe the children coming back won't necessarily know what location of the pool hall they're going to. So this is a great way of your teaching assistants being utilised there. They can supervise a small group within that larger group, obviously being overseen by that level 2. You can therefore increase your teacher to student ratio, and it also allows for a larger pool space. So you've got more coverage because you've got that 2-teacher approach. So you can also cover different sides of the pool as well, just to stop any overlap. So if you are working on 2 opposite sides of the pool, one can be, you can have your teaching assistant one side and your level 2 the other side, to ensure that communication and those demonstrations are happening effectively. And they can help manage lesson logistics. So as you're trying to find your feet and work out the best organizational methods to use throughout your lessons, those teaching assistants can also be used to help direct and give communication to those swimmers. So more specifically, 2 groups we really wanted to cover are preschool and SEND. So with our preschool, obviously considerations around the ability of swimmers in your preschool groups, and do they require that additional support? So if we're thinking about them being out of their depth, actually, they're probably out of their depth in most standard tank pools, whether they're shallow, middle, or deep. It would only really be that teaching pool where they'd be able to stand up. So if they are out of their depth and you remove that assistant, you need to have a look and think, would a parent or a guardian or a carer be of some benefit to that child's development in the lesson? So remember that it's the child that is out of their depth, not necessarily completely deep end. So have a look at your teaching stations as well. Consider larger teaching areas. You only need to think about the parent or carer and the child as being one unit. As long as the parent is in the pool supporting just their child in that lesson, your 6 meters squared still applies, but I would suggest just a larger teaching station just for comfort and ease of movement as well. But that does not mean that you're suddenly having to open up a larger space. You can also use that assistant to help communicate with that parent or that carer in the pool and ensure that they're taking all instructions from that level 2 and that assistant teacher. So your SEND, I know a couple of questions flagged up about this, and Katie did drop in the chat box that effectively we need to look at what's going on in terms of their everyday life as well and their school. So what has been risk assessed and what is suitable for that child? If they need that support in the water, that's a discussion between you and that customer to decide how that's going to look. You can definitely work with your teaching team as well and discuss the needs of your groups and individuals. See what's required and think of a phased approach if you feel that some groups or some individuals may not be ready to return to the pool just yet. Work with those parents to decide whether in-water support would be required or not at all. And if this is suitable, who's going to take that responsibility on? Consider different delivery methods using visual cues, pre-lesson walkthroughs. So a really good tip to prepare your swimmers to come back to the pool could be a video of walking through the pool from the entrance, past reception, into the changing rooms, onto the poolside. So actually they have an opportunity to go through that and understand then, are they swimming out of their depth? How will that look? Where is their swimming station? Who will they be meeting when they get there? And just remember, you can monitor and review all of this. So if something isn't working, do not be afraid to review and change. So let's not forget our adult swimmers either. So again, they may be out of their depth. We need to think about their requirements. Do they need a family member for moral support in the water? Do they actually need somebody in the water for a little bit more manual support, or to pass them a needle, or to pass them a float? Think about using a different space in the pool so that they have more touch points. So we're thinking about the edges of the pool. Are there 2 or 3 sides of the pool where they can feel more comfortable and more secure, ensuring that those weaker swimmers are at the side? You can also definitely use that assistant for moral support and to provide them with any equipment that they may need. Make sure you're utilising demonstrations and videos where possible. If you feel that an assistant teacher is required in the water for your adult learners, just make sure that they're adhering to that social distancing. Okay, should we pause there and just go through a couple of questions, Katie and
Alex?
Alex?
We could. There was just a couple of questions around SEND participants and obviously in a school setting. Now, in a school setting, if they have severe complex needs and they have a TA or an assistant that's already giving that manual support, just work with them of how then they can continue to give that support in a pool environment. So if you're working with schools, speak to the school and find out what measures that they have put in place and see how you can replicate them in that swimming pool environment. So it may be a case that you need to upskill the TAs to come in and give that support for you, if they're already providing it in the school setting, because they'd already been exposed to each other at that point. What we don't want to do is add another person to the mix of getting involved and getting hands-on. So if you can remove yourself as a teacher, but they've already had manual support with each other in the pool, that's absolutely fine. We can continue with that. The other question was around parents. How can we ensure that they live in the same household? We can't. We have to trust that they do, and there is no reason, the parent has made that decision to send someone else with them. The important thing is that they stay together and that they don't come into contact with another parent and child pair at that point, so they still need to remain socially distanced from them. When we talk about 6 meters square worth of space, that's what they need when they are static. Obviously, if you're doing movement or transition around the pool, so say they're going from one side to the other, if they move past each other and come closer, that's absolutely fine, because the risk is reduced because you keep going. Do you remember when the government said, please don't walk in the middle of the road to walk past somebody, just keep going? It's going to be the same thing. The activities you choose, if they are going to end up closer, they just need to keep going at that point.
Katie, I've just seen Nikki pop up with a question saying, so if a one-to-one TA that is supporting a child in a classroom, if they are willing to support in that swimming lesson, that would be suitable?
Yeah, not a problem at all. If the school are already doing that and the parent is comfortable with it, there's your risk assessment. It's absolutely fine.
Just another one, Katie. What would we class as an appropriate family member in terms of age to be supporting a swimmer?
That comes down to your pool guidance. So I know that some pools say it has to be somebody that's over the age of 18 that comes with them. Some pools say 16, so it will be relevant to each of your pool setouts and your adult and child ratios at that point at each pool.
And then Gary's just raised his hand. Gary, have you got a question you'd like to ask before we move on to the next section?
Yeah, just quickly. All swimming clubs have to have like a health survey come in. When they come back for swimming lessons, would the operator be having a similar sort of situation? There's been a lot of cases about, are they going to be in the same household? Would this be something that the operators would look into? They actually get the swimming lessons, or the people that are taking part in swimming lessons, to actually fill in a form, so you've got that information already ahead.
I mean, at the minute, there is no government guidance to suggest that's required. Okay. Is that a good practice? So clubs are looking at in other areas. Yeah, I would say so. That sounds really good. But I don't think that's to say that we're recommending it as a piece of guidance, because the government aren't currently.
I think what you would suggest, Gary, is for each operator, when the parents come back, and we've discussed this later on, is that obviously if there is no way of providing any other support than manual support to that learner in the pool because of your risk assessment, they might not come back in that first wave. So as and when your parents come back and your lessons come back, I would get them to re-sign their terms and conditions with things on there like saying if you have any symptoms, not to come to the pool. Give them all of the guidance around how you move around the pool, bring in their own equipment. So I would give all of that information to the parent in advance. I think that's really good practice to say that, you should be from within your same household, but you can't police it. I think as long as it's a bit like your terms and conditions, you sign it and they know the rules at that point, but you wouldn't be able to police it as a teacher unless you know them personally.
This wouldn't be all the swimmers, but this only be the people that actually need the support, like those that are on, like in SCN. If you need that support, would they? Because obviously they need to sign. You need to be made aware of their situation. So if they need someone in the water, would that person then have to sort of sign any sort of mitigation that they're in that pool? They understand, because if there's other people in the pool as well, they pose a risk to that other person.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point about them being in the water, because you might have a group of 8 and then only one parent or one carer comes into the water to support one child, and actually the other parents will be like, why is that parent in there, what's going on? So open and honest environment. If you're going to use parent support for a couple of children in the class but not everybody, let your parents know why. And also there was a question around DBS checks. As long as the parent or carer is only supporting that child that they've signed up to come with, they don't require a DBS check because they're under the supervision of the teacher. at that point. So it's they don't require that either, but I think it's best practice to be open and honest with the whole class of why they're there and actually the expectation of the parent. But I know Lauren's going to speak about that in a bit as well.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that.
No worries. Thanks, Gary.
I just wanted to also touch on Claire's point, because we've just had a quick chat in the chat box regarding if you had maybe multiple siblings, how would we look at the parent ratio there? And we've basically just had a discussion around risk assessing it and just taking it case by case, because if it was triplets, what are their current ability? Have a look at what level of support they would need in the water and how that would look. I think a lot of this is having a look at your environment, your pool setup, and deciding if it will benefit those children or not. And that's where the decisions come into play. But I think that is everything, Katie and Alex, unless I've missed anything else.
No, nothing else from what I can see.
Fab. Okay, let's take you guys through some equipment adaptations. So there are lots of equipment choices out there, and as we mentioned earlier on, do not think that you just have to give your entire class exactly the same and take it away. We want to ensure that every child has that opportunity to progress as an individual. So we have fixed flotation equipment such as your shark fins, your back floats, your aquaplanes, and the vests as well. We have arm discs and noodles that can be used. One of our biggest questions is, can the swimmers bring their own? And we want to communicate with parents pre-lesson so that they can support their child having that equipment put on them. So actually, if they can purchase their own piece of equipment, yes, we know there's going to be plenty of pools and plenty of parents that will not be able to do that. But if they can, how much easier that's going to be in preparation for the lessons beginning. So you could have videos on how to apply the shark fins. You could have videos for the children to look at on how they put on and then remove their arm discs. You could have laminated photos as the parents come into poolside on how the parents then ensure that equipment is safely put on their child. This could definitely build part of your lesson as well. So let's teach children. Children are so clever, and it will just become habit. If they know what to do at the start of every lesson, they will soon become accustomed to putting a shark fin on themselves with the help of their parent, guardian, or carer. So guys, just in the chat box, I want to know what equipment your pool already has that you can adapt to suit deep water teaching. So what else could you use if those swimmers are out of their depth? Noodles and shark fins. We only have noodles and floats.
Like someone's put the Aquafit dumbbells as well, noodles and floats, discs, arm discs, yeah, great. Armbands, be careful with the armbands. Again, they're inflatables. I highly recommend arm discs so they don't have risk of puncturing. But obviously if they're the parents' own equipment and they're in the water, then that's fine. Animal floats, balls as well, smaller ones. Have a think about your pool boys as well. Our local pool has hundreds of pool boys. I think they've just been collected over the years of people leaving them behind. But they, the smaller ones, the larger ones, they're really useful as well. That they slot under the arm quite nicely.
Somebody said the buoyancy belts. Yeah, with your adult swimmers as well, buoyancy belts are brilliant. Just be careful with the different sizes if you're using them with children.
I think we saw from the other images as well that we put up with buoyancy belts or things like the aquaplanes and shark fins, they can be used with other equipment as well. So if you're worried about the children's core stability and about them falling forwards, put a noodle in front of them, put some arm discs on as well.
So Paula has said, if a child comes with flotation equipment already on, are they able to remove it themselves, or will we need to get parents to remove it if we want to try them without it? I would definitely say that is going to be, again, a case-by-case situation. So it's understanding whether that child is able to or not. where is their parent on poolside? What's the setup of your pool? Is it suitable for that parent to then come on to poolside? It might be something that you need to preempt for the following week. And the thing is, I think it might just take a little bit more planning and preparation. So if it is, let's say, a vest that the child already wears, it might be saying to that parent, okay, let's make sure we take 2 blocks out, maybe try here and here ahead of next week's lesson. So actually, it's just a different way of working, but don't think that there's one way of doing it. There's plenty of ways, and if you get it wrong, then we just reassess it and go again.
Think about the equipment that you're using as well. Can the kids take it off themselves? Like buckles, are pretty tricky for them to get on and off. So the kids that you don't want them to get the equipment off, maybe buckle them in. And then those that you want them to be able to remove it because they're slightly more confident, maybe they've got more kind of Velcro straps and they can learn how to do those. There's some great videos of aquaplane and shark fins of children putting them on and off themselves, and also ones where the teacher's putting them on, but maybe you could share that with the parents so they could put them on in advance of the class.
Again, thinking of that new normal, that could be part of your lesson as well as entries and exits. Well, getting your flotation equipment ready, because that is a personal skill they need to be able to do. Especially if they then go and swim with a parent or someone in a public swim. So that could be part of your lesson as well. So think about including that in, and think about some of the equipment such as aquaplane, which Lauren's going to go for in a minute, that then doubles up as a kickboard or other pieces of equipment as well. So think about how that can be used in a variety of ways.
Sorry, Lauren, I just picked up on Ruth's comment around without any flotation worries me. Alex, I don't know how quickly you can go back to one of the slides with the little people on. Whether that's what we don't want to see is loads of children swimming one at a time. Now I teach a stage 3 in deep water, so they've come up from stage 2 where they can touch the bottom and then they come up into stage 3. I've got 10 of them. I'm lucky enough if my assistant gets up on a Sunday to come along and give me a hand. If not, I'm on my own on the pool side. But what I would suggest you do, what I have is that those children that have just come into the class, that I want to give them a little bit more encouragement and more security, they swim by me, they swim by the edge of the pool, so they're closer. So they may have more equipment on. Those that are more advanced swim further away with less equipment. However, when I want to test those that are a little bit more advanced without any equipment on, and I'm not sure how far that they're going to be able to go, what I would do is this example that you can see on the screen here. So I would take and I would remove their equipment from them, and the 2 that are weaker and obviously having all of their equipment removed, because we're going to try them with full arm and leg action at this point, would only swim to the first cone and back and by the side. So in the case of an emergency, I could lean over, pass them a noodle, they can pick it up and carry on at that point. So, and then the rest of them that are on equipment would move further away from me and continue swimming backwards and forwards with the equipment on. What you don't want is children waiting one at a time and getting cold. What you can do is secure the majority of your class, get them on a bit of equipment going, whilst the other 2 are having a go without the equipment by the side. So again, risk assess it and think, how am I going to manage this situation, and in what is the safest way for me to do it? So reduce the distance and bring them closer to you.
And then just to add to that, and I think Irene, you've kind of summarised that really well. She just said, take it slow, plan and communicate from week to week. Rome wasn't built in a day, and that's right. Just gradually do it. You know, they don't necessarily have to do that first full width for whatever distance you're doing on first lesson. Just slowly build it up. Think about those core aquatic skills. Okay, we're going to do floating with no equipment, and then we'll put equipment back on for traveling. So just think about how you can build it up so their confidence grows, and all of a sudden they'll be across the pool and swim into that kind of that to alleviate that worry that you may have.
And do you know what I really like as well about teaching in deep water and being on the pool side? I see a lot of teachers literally dragging the children from one side to the other. They're not learning anything then. They're not learning about buoyancy. They're not physically getting stronger because you're doing it all for them. It's fine when you're trying to create water confidence, but actually when they're water confident, you don't need to be dragging them. If they can't make it to the other side, maybe the distance is too big for them. Maybe they haven't really got a good body position. Maybe they haven't been able to put their face in the water. Also, I see a lot of distance badges being handed out for a teacher walking in front of a child and creating an eddy current that they're getting sucked into and getting across the other side and congratulating them for that. But actually, you've done it. So being more hands off will actually, I think, get these kids swimming a lot quicker once they're water confident.
Ruth has just said thank you for that. She feels that it's to do with her confidence as well. And Ruth, all I'd add to that is I know we're looking at deeper water for the children to be swimming in, but at the same time, don't be afraid to plan ahead for maybe 2 weeks' time and actually organise a station switch. So ahead of the lesson, redesign it so that maybe you do take those children into shallower waters where you then have that confidence. If it's in you as well and you are concerned, I would just say, yes, we don't want to be switching mid-lesson, but plan ahead and say to another teacher, actually, can we switch for that 1 week? And then you both know where you're going, you've got your equipment, and that will help you build your confidence as well. Maybe if you're not quite as, if you're concerned about a certain depth, that you can kind of have that reassuring element of being slightly shallower as well. So hopefully that helps, Ruth. And Alex has just said, yeah, if you need any support, do drop us an email at learntoswim@swimming.org. We're always happy to support. We did have a question. I'm just still scanning through the inbox. In terms of school, so the children needing help with hats, goggles, costumes, without having the parents. So Alison, thank you for that question. And it is ultimately that the children need educating, and that is to be communicated to the parents, that the children need to learn how to be able to put their hats on, how to be able to put their goggles on, because it's government guidelines. It's not us saying that we have to adhere to social distancing, it's the government. So I would just encourage videos, posters, getting the children to practice it. Depending on what time you go swimming, maybe the children can have that beach ready. So actually, if you are straight in the pool, can the children come with their costumes on underneath their swimming, underneath their school uniform? So have a think outside the box a little bit, and it is going to be around a lot of education with parents and children.
And there was just one around swimming hats coming off as well. If a swim hat comes off, leave it off. Don't even worry about it. I think hopefully they've all got one that's going to stay on nicely. And again, about educating the parents and the schools of what equipment is suitable and what isn't. But if it comes off and they can't get it back on, let's not waste our lesson, leave it off at that point. There's been a couple about how long you need to dip the equipment for. Again, it's about sanitization, with the equipment. Dunk it in the pool, give it a good rinse off and put it on the side. If no child has sneezed or snotted or licked it or, any of those disgusting things that they all do, again, we haven't got a risk of transmission at that point, but you're going to clean every single piece of equipment like everyone cleans every shopping trolley as it comes out. At that point, there's no set time limit that it goes in there for. One of the nice things that came out from one of these calls is a swim school was going to get 2 big buckets. So as the parents came in with the children, they put all their shark fins and arm discs and everything on from the clean bucket. And as the kids got out, they dumped it in the dirty bucket, and the assistant or the lifeguard or the cleaner was responsible for cleaning that and then moving it around. So there was a nice rotation of equipment at that point. So that's how they were going to organise their equipment clean. But remember, it's going in the chlorine every single time. So even if you hand a float to somebody, they're going to be then putting it into the chlorinated water.
Thank you, Katie. So we have other pieces of equipment that you may not have used before or not considered. So we have things like the aquaplane or the shark fin, which I believe all 3 of us have used and think they are pieces of equipment. Arm discs, again, really good to even pair up with a shark fin or aquaplane. It can build that confidence and gradually reduce that flotation for each individual. Think about noodle connectors as well, so actually changing the shape and the usage of your noodles, as well as the use of swim decks. I know there was just a couple of comments in the chat box around children kind of dispersing and then heading straight back to the swim decks or the platform. So obviously that does need to be managed so that you're not getting that crowding, but they are fab to have in the pool as well. And as we mentioned, flotation jackets or vests. So let's have a little look at variations of equipment on the front. So we've got one with a noodle and a kickboard, one swimmer with just a kickboard, one with a kickboard and discs, We've got one of the back floats, whether it's a shark fin or aquaplane with a kickboard. We've got a noodle on its own. We've got a noodle and discs there. We've got a noodle and a back float, aquaplane or shark fin there. You know, we've got a noodle there that's underneath the arm, so that actually the children have the freedom of adding in that hand paddle. And yeah, you can see that there's so many variations here. Don't think that you need to just use one piece of equipment. I know this is potentially a luxury, that you might not have all of this, but it's just giving you that snapshot of what is possible, and that if the children have all this equipment, they're going to be safe, they're going to be secure, and you determine when it's safe for the child to have that equipment removed. Okay, Alex, can we go on to the next slide? I believe we're going to look at variations on the back. So you can see again, we're going to show you a video in a second actually, because a lot of people worry about using the shark fin, the aquaplanes or the back floats on their back, but they are designed for that, and they are really, really good for children to have free use of their arms and obviously find that correct body position, as well as maintain that leg kick. You've then got discs and a kickboard here. You've then got the pad up of the discs and the aquaplane or the shark fin or back float. You've got discs on its own, kickboard on its own, and then of course probably the most traditional one that I've seen, a noodle on their back. So again, don't be afraid of your class looking like this. If you have the luxury of multiple pieces of equipment, then make sure that it's what suits that individual, and they will be safer in that deeper water. Okay, Alex, let's have a look at the next slide. I think this is a video, guys, to show you of an aquaplane being used. So if you haven't seen an aquaplane before, you can obviously see there's two straps there. I know certain swimmers won't be capable of applying it with enough kind of security on it. However, don't be afraid about using it with your older swimmers either.
Laura made a question around, are these suitable for swimming on the back compared to shark fins? And I think this is just a really good example how, yes, they do help and are still really useful on their back in terms of helping that body position and traveling through the water.
Absolutely, and you can see there specifically with the aquaplane in this video, it actually can turn into just a kickboard. So those straps come out. So if it is something that you've not used before, it's just showing you that multi-use of aquaplane specifically, but there are plenty to choose from within the industry, and this was just an example to show you, because like you said, Alex, I think a lot of people are worried about the children swimming on their back, and if you are concerned, then add those arm discs on there as well, just to give them that extra stability. Fab. Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please, Alex? So other equipment that may support your organisation of your lessons, consider how you can utilise current equipment and new to support the organisation and logistics of teaching in the water. So Katie took you guys back to the method of looping the children at different distances. So using those cones, coloured equipment, I used to stand up like the Zog sinkers, and that was just a color-coded indicator as well for how far my swimmers were needing to swim before coming back. Obviously learners can bring their own equipment as well, especially with the preschoolers. They love putting stuff in their mouth, especially the younger preschoolers. Encourage them to bring their own bath toys as well. That will help avoid any transmission there or minimize it. We've got foam shapes, any signage, flashcards or markers as well. So there's lots there that can help you with your organisation of your lessons. So just a quick example of swim deck here, guys. If you've not seen them before, there are various pool platforms that you can use. And again, I would give the children an indicator of which children are going to the pool platform or the swim deck, and which children are then going to the side. Maybe you could give them zones to avoid any congregation on those platforms, as I think Ruth mentioned. So again, it is a great consideration if those children are in deeper water, just to give them that stopping point, that cue of where they need to swim to and then return, or swim to, rest, and then continue swimming. Okay, fab. I'm going to hand back over to Alex for communication adaptations.
Awesome, thank you, Lauren. Okay, so quite a brief element today on communication, because we know that we've got a separate webinar available specifically around communication that you can access either if you've booked on a one or if you watch the recording at a later date. But we did think it was important just to touch on it today and some of the key elements that you need to consider to make sure your delivery is effective, especially if you're using new equipment, new pool spaces, and you're in deep water. So verbally, so we're going to look at verbal and non-verbal. So in terms of verbal, speak clearly, concisely, and use language that is appropriate to the age of your participants. So do they understand exactly what you're saying? Consider the surrounding noise levels and ensure swimmers can hear you. So that's really tough in our poolside environments that we teach on. So think about what you can do to mitigate that, or change your delivery so that, and your communication, that learners can hear you appropriately. Think about how you can involve questions and answers, and so that you can check the learner's understanding and that your communication is resonating and working with the learners. So can you include questions, guided discovery, lead them to the answers on their own? So think about how you can include that. Try not to shout, because you'll often become unclear and learners can't absorb the information. Try not to ramble and let them have a go. So as Katie said earlier, yes, we want them to be safe, but let them have a go, feel that water and develop in the water without lots of instructions. So let them have a go first. And then don't necessarily expect learners to understand on the first explanation. So there's a lot of information we can often be giving learners, and new skills. Again, in that COVID environment, there'll be a lot for them to take in. So think about how you need to reiterate that so that they get the message clearly. Okay, let's have a look at a few of the non-verbal kind of considerations. So from your point of view as a teacher, think about how you demonstrate. And we're going to be doing a topic on this, which we'll talk about at the end in the coming weeks, around demonstrations specifically. But think about how your demonstrations can use verbal and non-verbal cues, and how you can be in a good position so that learners can see you and understand your accurate demo. Think about your body position, your facial expressions, and how you stand on poolside. So can you be in the moment so learners know you're listening to them and that you're engaged with them? So think about how you're standing, how you smile, how you're facing them as you're talking, because that really matters to those learners in the water. Think about your gestures and hand signals and how they can support both verbal in terms of complementing something you're saying, but also how they can support that non-verbal communication for learners that understand non-verbal cues much better. And then think about your practical demo. So that might include putting equipment on. And that's something we've talked a lot about today. So think about how you can practice that so they're ready for their lesson. Other things to consider, and I can see the chat box has covered a few of these, but signage on poolside to help with those organizational methods. Activity cards. We've got preschool and learn to swim activity cards with game ideas based around the outcomes and core aquatic skills you can use, but you might have some of your own. Posters, whiteboards, so you can write messages or do circuits and give them different activities. So think about how you can change that. How consistent to play. Can you have the assistant at the other side of the pool and they give feedback as you're giving feedback? So think about how you can utilize other people around poolside. Videos, how can you use them to support your lessons? So we have things such as the expected standards videos you can tap into. But what about sharing a video like the aquaplane we've just showed you to your parents to let them know what the equipment is you might be using? What toys and equipment can you use to support the lessons? And I know Lauren's took you through lots of examples of equipment. So very briefly then, our 5 kind of key rules for communication and adapting to deep water teaching is stand tall. So think about your presence, your body language, and then you in the moment to deliver to those learners. Ensure the whole class can hear and see you when you're delivering. Make eye contact. Use different types of communication, both verbal and non-verbal, to meet the needs of a variety of different learners. And ensure that your communication is clear and concise. Now, again, if you want to dive into that even more, we've got a separate webinar around that. You'll be able to access the recording and hear all about their top tips and practical examples of how you can do that. Okay, so just to round off with our top tips, and then we'll pause for questions. As Katie and Lauren said, we're conscious of time today. But here are our kind of top tips we hope you can take away from today's webinar. Consider how you're going to adapt your communication for teaching in deep water. Prepare swimmers and parents in advance. So what do they need to know before they get to the pool? Like things such as what equipment they may need and where they're going to put their equipment on. Include water safety elements and speak to your lifeguards. So think about what water safety skills and adjustments you might need to make, such as risk assessments. Adapt your equipment to suit the swimmers. So change it based on your in deep water and the activity you're doing, rather than using equipment generically because it's what you've always done. So think about how you can adapt it to suit their needs in deep water. Include water confidence, so they're comfortable in the water. Don't forget the core aquatic skills. So yes, you might be in deep water, and yes, we've got some new kind of challenges with COVID, but our core aquatic skills are still fundamental to creating competent and confident swimmers. And then finally, keep it simple, enjoy. There's a long time since you guys have probably been teaching and on poolside. So when you get back, enjoy it. Make those lessons as fun as possible so those swimmers will fall back in love with the sport that we all love. Okay, Lauren, just run through our support and resources and then we'll come for questions if that's okay.
Of course. I'm literally just going to drop all the links into the chat box right now for everything we've covered today. So please copy and paste away. There we go. So as we have been developing our support, we've been looking at different ways of supporting the industry alongside our guidance. So we've delivered webinars on teaching from poolside, effective communication, voice projection, and we are looking at future network opportunities as well. So there's been a whole host of further development plans going into place. So alongside the guidance, we also created example pool layouts. We created a whole host of temporary lesson structure plans. So do have a look at these. These will give you a little bit of guidance, a little bit of on how you can reintroduce your swimmers to the pool. We've also got a whole host of marketing that is downloadable and for free. All of this is for free. You can use this across your social media platforms as well as in your centre to educate your customers. And we are working so that we follow any government guidance updates and ensuring that we revise and publish any of the sections within the returning to pool guidance document that is required. We have also got a number of touch points. We just mentioned the network. So myself and Alex host bi-weekly coffee chats. They're a lovely 30 minutes open link. So I've dropped the link in the chat box already. You can just go on a Thursday, click the link and come and join myself and Alex. You can ask any questions you would like to. And yeah, it's just a bit of an informal chat to touch base. We also have the resources. So all of these resources I've mentioned, if you click on the link I've dropped in there, which is the Returning to Poolside resource link, all of these documents are downloadable, and there's a whole host of other documents on there, such as risk assessment templates and a virtual pool layout example where myself and Alex are talking you through the theory behind our pool layout design as well. So to conclude for today, guys, we hope that you are all now able to identify key considerations for the safe delivery of lessons in deeper water. You've developed knowledge and understanding in managing a group of non-swimmers in deep water, and identify a range of swimming equipment for deep water use as well. Okay, and we're good to take some questions.
So questions about any new webinars that are coming. We'll release the dates, those in due course. If you go onto the Institute of Swimming website, you will find a host of fantastic free and paid CPDs you can tap into. And the Learn to Swim webinars that we'll be hosting, we'll be releasing as soon as possible. We're just working through the dates and making sure everything's ready to go. So they'll be out within the coming weeks for you to book onto, and we will update you about that as well.
Are the activity cards on the Swim England site? So there are plenty of free downloadable resources on that link I popped in there for you guys, so do check that out. With there are games embedded in those lesson structure plans. Dave, you asked, are we rolling this training out to the tutors to then be able to deliver? So these 3 topics that we've delivered have been recorded and will be uploaded so that they can be viewed, but there will be no future live delivery, should I say. So hopefully that's cleared that one.
We've just had one around parents to assist children would create the need for additional changing room space. This is a concern for virus transmission. Again, your changing rooms, depending on your layout, are going to be dependent on the maximum capacities of your pool anyway. So you're going to need to work out how many changing rooms you need available. If you have family change or open change, it's going to be very different.
Someone had a question around, do parents need to be insured if they're getting in the pool, in the lesson? To the best of our knowledge, no. You're similar to a parent and child class, or if you go to Tumble Tops or mums and babies class at a community centre, no, they're under the supervision of the level 2 and need to follow those level 2 instructions. However, yes, I would include it in your risk assessment to say parents are coming in the water, but no, not in terms of insurance, but just kind of consult with your line managers or your swim school owners as well on that matter.
And if you are making any changes and you want to run it past your insurance company first, then do so, just to make sure that you're covered. And again, if you're a smaller swim school and you're hiring hotel pools, school pools, private facilities, work with them and find out who's responsible for the cleaning of the changing room areas in between your classes. Is that yourselves? Will it be cleaners that are on site? Just so you cover all bases.
Katie, we've had a question regarding competitive club swimming. I've lost the question now. Ken, if you want to come off mute, is that specific in terms of this type of supportive training? Just confirm that. I'm not 100% sure on what the clubs have been delivering. Katie, I don't know if you can give any.
The clubs have been going around all of the regions and doing webinars to support in their delivery. I know that much, and obviously the club guidance is there, but there is a specific email address, clubguidance@swimming.org. Might have made that up. Someone want to go?
Thank you.
That is right, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Very much.
No worries. Just had a message from Kerry as well saying the webinar booking doesn't take you through to activities for COVID-19. They're about to get uploaded, so don't worry, they'll be there. Keep hold of that link. We'll try. I'm just looking at the dates we've got provisionally booked, and I'll work with Lauren and Alex to try and pull one forward for that one, because I think it's going to be a popular one as well. Colleagues completed level 1 online, not too sure about how they're going to do the practical part. The Institute of Swimming are going to figure that out. We've had Jen on the call, and our tutors will get in touch with them and figure out how they're going to do their practical session. Depending on where they are with the country, we've got great relationships with our pools that are all looking for support, so we'll get that practical sorted, don't worry.
Katie, we've had a question around how somebody can stay up to date with the latest release of webinars. Do we have anywhere that we are currently sending and communicating that out, or would, I'm just thinking the
Pooling resources.
Thank you.
So if you, Lauren will put the chat box in, but if you go onto swimming.org and type in newsletter into the search bar, you can sign up to our regular newsletter, and also keep an eye on the Institute of Swimming page. Facebook page and Swim England qualifications page, because all of our events also get posted on there as well. So we are going to wrap up for today if there's no more questions. All you need to do is press the big red button to exit and enjoy the rest of your day. But I hope, I'm looking at the chat bar, I think the majority of you have found it useful. And we hope we've given you some confidence in going back to what we love doing. And it's been great to see you all. You've been a great bunch and engaging. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.